Hello Year 10 and welcome to this short video on your English Language C1 exam. This video will show you what to expect in the exam and will remind you what you need to do to answer all of the questions and give you some of the information on structures and timings to support you. I will go through the information fairly quickly, so feel free to pause on certain slides to take notes. So the exam takes place on Thursday the 22nd of June and it will take place over periods 2 and 3. This exam looks at your ability to identify and interpret fiction as well as writing your own fiction, your own piece of creative writing. For the exam you have 1 hour 45 minutes to complete, so you should spend your time with 1 hour for the reading, making sure you answer all 5 of the reading questions, and there are 40 marks available there. For the second part of the exam, 45 minutes for creative writing. Here you get the choice of 4 separate tasks, or prompts as they're known, and you would choose one of those. Again, it's out of 40 marks, so out of 80 marks in total. The main message that your teachers will be sharing with you, and I shall share on this video, is that you must answer every question in the exam. No ifs, buts or maybes. You must answer every question. The reason for this is that in the English exams there are lots of marks available for each question. Every 4 or 5 marks takes you up another grade boundary. So if you miss out 1 question or 2 questions, you may well find yourself dropping 2, 3, 4 grades. So you must try every question. Even if you're not sure, reread the text again. Support your ideas with evidence from the text. You will get some marks if you do that. Make sure you do. So, key reminders. Take a ruler with you. You've all been shown how to use a ruler to support your reading. You must have one with you. Those students in years 10 and 11 who use rulers in our exams always do better than those that don't. So be one of those students who brings a ruler. Don't forget. Your timings are going to be vital. I shall go through those in a second. You must learn these. You must write them down on the front of the paper. You must stick to them. Even if you feel like an answer to a question is not perfect, you must move on to the next one. Make sure that you revise the structures for reading and writing. I shall go through those again in a moment, but all of those are available on the PDF that I've also sent out with this video. Read and annotate all the questions in the exam. Check the questions 2 or 3 times. Underline the important words. In English, the important words are those words that show you what you need to include in your answer. Your answers must always connect to the question in all parts of this paper, whether it's the reading or the writing. And with the creative writing, there is always 4 or 5 students in the year group who try to do all 4 pieces of creative writing. You only need to do one. It says it on the exam paper, and you will only be marked for one. Make life easy for yourself and only do one of those pieces of creative writing. Okay, so timings for your hour and 45 minutes. There will be nobody in the hall reminding you to move on after a certain amount of time. That reminding has to come from yourself. So in section A, the reading part of the paper, questions 1 and 2 are 5 mark questions. With question 1, you need to answer in bullet points. That's the only question in the exam which requires bullet points. Everything else requires full sentences and full answers. So questions 1 and 2, spend 15 minutes on them in total. Question 3, 15 minutes. Question 4, 15 minutes. Question 5, 15 minutes. And then you will have 45 minutes to complete the creative writing. So, what does question 1 look like? You have been through this paper before, and I'm just showing you the examples. Question 1 will give you a few lines to read, only a handful. Read those lines, box it out with your ruler so that you're making sure that you only answer from those lines. And it will always say list 5 things you learn. And this might be about a character, it might be about a setting, it might be about a situation. What you have to do is to bullet point the answers. So, first of all, identify the focus of the question by underlining key words. In this question, your key word is Emma. All your points need to be about her. Box out this section. Your answer should be in simple bullet points. The best way of doing it is to take the keyword from the question and use that at the beginning of your sentence. So you might say Emma is, or Emma is, Emma is. That keeps you focused on the question. There is no requirement to use quotations in this answer. Find the piece of information and write it down. Only the first 5 points that you make are marked. If you write any more, then we will only mark the first 5. Cross out any you're not sure of if you do more than 5. Now, at the top of the piece of writing, there will be a little piece in italics giving you a little bit of information about the text to follow. Do not quote or use any information from that bit in italics. It will not count towards your marks. Question 2. This will ask you to read some more lines. It will not be on the same lines as question 1. So this question says read lines 7 to 16. Okay, and again, it's a shorter answer. You need to be looking to make 5 points here. Now the question I've given you as an example here is on the characters of Emma and Robbie and our impressions of them. If you get a question that covers more than one character, you must make sure at least one of your points is on the other character. So you could do 4 points on Emma and 1 on Robbie, for example. So with this question, identify the focus of the question by underlining keywords, i.e. Emma and Robbie. Box out the section. Your answers here must be in full sentences, and you should aim to write 5 points in total. Now for this question, you need to use the structure that you have been working on this year. A simple chronological structure, and you go through the text from the start of the section, making a point, and then finding a quote, making the point, writing it down, finding the next quote, making the point, writing it down. All the way through the text until you've done 5 points. The points need to be simple and concise. The points can be 1 sentence long or 2 sentences long. Keep them simple. In your answer, make sure you always refer back to the question that you're given, and also make sure that you explain your point. If you think that Emma is a patient person, for example, in this question, you need to find a quote which shows that, and then you need to explain why that quote shows that she's patient. Okay? So you're looking for 5 of those. So here's an example. So there's a quotation about Robbie in the text. He was 20 years older than her, a stocky, red-bearded Scot who was well known for his grumpiness. Now at this point it might be worthwhile just pausing this and looking at this a bit more closely, but only one of these points would get you a mark, which would be number 2. At the start, the writer describes Robbie as being well known for his grumpiness, which gives the impression that he has a reputation for being moody. That would be 1 mark. Why would it be 1 mark? Because your inference, your idea about the text is accurate. Okay? That's what that quote suggests about him. But it's also in your own words. You've explained it. You've shown that you understand it. Question 3, which you'll be coming on to next, is a slightly longer question. It's a 10-mark question. But the way we approach it is exactly the same as question 2. Okay? You identify the focus of the question by underlining keywords. In this case, it's Emma again. And sometimes the questions in this exam will ask you about the same characters, but looking at a different section of text. Again, box out this section so that you don't accidentally take quotes from other parts of the text. Your answers should be in full sentences using the structure that I showed you a moment ago and will remind you of again. For the 10 markers, you should be aiming to make 8 points in total. However, once you get to the 15 minutes, you must move on. So if you've made fewer than 8, you still must move on. Okay, so again, here are some examples. There's 2 or 3 examples that would not get you a mark. But I'm going to just look at the one that would, which is the one in green at the bottom. So the quotation is, Emma got the idea into her head that she would like to walk out to Wreck Island. She couldn't explain why. And the comment that would get the mark is, at the start, the writer describes that Emma got the idea into her head that she would like to walk out to Wreck Island, but she couldn't explain why, which suggests that she is a very reckless character. Okay, the key idea here is that the student has thought carefully about the quote and come up with an inference about the character, the fact that she's reckless. So it uses a full quote, and actually in this case you needed to use a longer quote and get both sentences in to get the full idea, and then there's an accurate inference about her character. Have a look at the other examples, pause the video to see why they would not get the marks. Again, use this structure chronologically going through the text. Find a point or find a quote, write the point down, find the next quote, write the point down. If you do it like that, you will make more points. And the more points that you make for the 10 markers, the more marks you would get and the better grade you'll get overall. Moving on to question 4. Now question 4 is fairly similar, but there's a couple of subtle differences. This one tests more your evaluation skills rather than your analysis, but the way that you approach it is the same. So lines 31 to 55, and it says, how does the writer make these lines exciting and dramatic? 10 marks. Okay, again, identify the focus of the question by underlining keywords. In this case, it would be exciting and dramatic. Remember to box out that section, those lines, and your answers should be in full sentences. You should be aiming to make 10 points, or 8 plus points, it should say. That's a mistake on there. If you can make 10 points, brilliant, but realistically in the 15 minutes, 8 points is probably the maximum most people can do. Okay, that's just a mistake on the slide there. Moving on to question 5. The last one in the reading part of the question. This is again slightly different, but the approach should be fairly similar. It says to answer this question you need to read lines 56 to 70, which is the last part of the exam, and also to consider the passage as a whole. So this question always does this, the question 5. It asks you to read the last part and then consider the whole text. So your quotations need to be from the start of the text, but also including that last section. So yes, I'm showing you example questions here, but they always work the same way in every exam. So this one gives you a statement which you then have to write about. So the statement here is, the writer uses the walk to Wreck Island to show a change in both Emma and Robbie. How far do you agree with this view? So this question is asking for more of a personal opinion than some of the other questions. 10 marks, so again it's about making 10 points. So this is your evaluation question. This means that you can explain your own thoughts and feelings about the characters or the topic that you've been asked to write about. It's almost always a good idea to agree with the statement first of all. Now that might be a full agreement or it might be a partial agreement with the statement. They always give you a comment which more or less you can find more ideas to agree with than to disagree with. You must cover the full text, and when you start with an overall statement about the text, because by that point you'd have read the whole text. Overall, I agree with or partly agree that in this case there is a change in Emma and Robbie, and you need to explain briefly why you think that there is a change. Then you go through the text looking for those changes chronologically. Always do it that way. Go through the text chronologically and systematically. That way you will find more points that link to the question. So with this question, you need to write that effective overall statement, and you'll get a mark for that if you do that well. There are 2 examples here. The first one in red. Overall, I agree that the writer uses the walk to Wreck Island to show a change in both Emma and Robbie. That wouldn't get you a mark because you haven't really explored how they've changed or why they've changed. So the next one is slightly more detailed. It says, overall, I agree that the writer uses the walk to Wreck Island to show a brief change in Emma as she recognises her mistake. However, Robbie stays grumpy throughout. Okay, so that's looking at the changes or whether there are changes in the characters. And of course, the second overall statement is better because there is more detail and shows a better grasp of the whole text. Then you go through and you use your simple structure, the one that I've shown you for all the 10 markers. At the start, next, after this, go through chronologically, showing the changes in the characters in this case. Okay, so those reading questions are always worded very similarly, and the questions are designed in the same way. It's just that the text is going to be different. You've got to think on your feet a little bit. Section B is your creative writing. You will have 45 minutes for this. With the creative writing, you're going to get 4 prompts, but as I said earlier on in the video, you only answer one of those prompts. This is testing your creative prose writing skills, your ability to tell a story in a very short amount of time. It is a challenging question, but many of our students do a great job on it. Okay, you should aim, as it says here, to write about 450 to 600 words. However, be realistic. Don't spend your time counting the number of words you've done. That's usually around a couple of sides for average size handwriting of A4. 40 marks again available. Now, you've got your 4 prompts, read them through and make a fairly swift decision on which prompt you're going to do and stick with it. Don't change your mind halfway through, because anything you cross out we're not going to be able to mark. So, planning structure. Once you've made your decision, if you remember, we tend to suggest that you use first person confessional. What that means is you're writing as I. You're putting yourself in the shoes of your character and empathizing from their viewpoint. Best way of doing it is to write in the past tense, looking back on an event that's happened, with your character confessing the truth around something important within their life. So what you need to do is use this simple structure. First of all, create the mood of the story by describing your setting, using pathetic fallacy, using strategies like personification, looking at the weather, looking at nature, creating that mood for the reader. Then bring your character in. Describe what your character is doing. Where are they going? What thoughts are going through their mind? Are they with somebody else? Now you're starting the story. Then you move to your main event and turning point, which should always be linked to the prompt that you've picked. What is it that happens in your story? Your story must be a story, and in a story something significant happens. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering or groundbreaking. It can be a very simple, small event, but it is a story where something either goes downhill for a character or uphill. And then at the end you have your consequences. It might be that you want to twist in the towel at the end, but when you're thinking about your consequences, it's okay, that main event has happened. What has this led to? It's a simple structure. This is not 4 paragraphs. This is 4 sections. It may well be that some of those sections are a significant number of paragraphs. Some of those sections will be much longer and more detailed than others. But this structure keeps it simple and keeps you focused. So, what we've found in the past is that sometimes students struggle to come up with a story. So I think the first thing to say is think of those stories that you've written in class. You've already written a couple of stories so far this year. You've had stories modelled to you by a teacher. You've read successful and less successful stories written by past students. Those stories are all available on the Google Drive, which your teacher would have linked, your Google Classroom, which your teacher would have provided a link for you. If you haven't got access to that, do ask your English teacher. So, these are generic story ideas. These are things that we've used in class and talked about for if you come up with a prompt and you're not really sure what to write. You could set the story in an exam hall. You're in an exam hall while you're writing it. That will give you some inspiration. The letter with devastating news. That works very well, very powerful. Breaking a precious object. Okay. That can be a really, really good story. Very simple, works well. My favourite, however, is the bravado or point of no return story. And that works very well if you're writing from the point of view of a teenage narrator. Usually it's about risk taking. A group of your peers or a peer or somebody has dared the character to do something, and they've done something and there is no way back from that. They've done something perhaps stupid, they've made a mistake, and that mistake may be something that will stay with them for the rest of their life. And number 5, the discovering a cheat story. And that works really well as well. So what you do is you make sure that your story links to your prompt. So if I go back to those prompts I mentioned earlier, these are ones you did look at in class. But for example, I might look at C, write about a time when you had to go shopping with a relative. And so I might think, I'm not sure what to do. Okay, I'm going to link it to the idea of bravado, point of no return. Right, how am I going to do that? Well, if my character is with another character, perhaps it must be a relative. So maybe it's a brother, a sister, maybe somebody slightly older who dares them to do something, and your character looks up to that sibling, and as a result, does what they ask them to do, and that leads to some sort of consequence. So, tips for success that we found useful. This story has to be very tight. You're not writing the next Bible. You cannot set this story partly in New York and partly in London. You want to be avoiding implausible stories, such as, for example, aliens, bank heists, ghosts, and zombies. Let's be honest. We certainly don't want a story that sounds like a play with lots of dialogue. We want a story which has action and a plot, but gives you chance to describe setting and to bring alive the voice of the character whose point of view you're writing from. So 2 characters maximum. Sometimes having siblings works, or teacher and student, best friends, parent, child. People who already have this relationship. 2 settings maximum. Sometimes, to be honest with you, I prefer to stick it just in one setting. Your main event must be over a short moment in time. An event that can happen over a matter of seconds or minutes often works better than one that is elongated over a long space. Words mentioned in the title, so there's one called grandma, for example, should be referred to regularly. You cannot just mention grandma in the first paragraph and then go off and talk about something completely different. You must stick to the idea of a story about grandma. A golden rule is always mention the word from your title at the beginning and the end of your story, so you stay tethered to that title. 2 sides is about the right length. If you are only writing one side and you've got average size handwriting, that will not be enough for you to score highly. Avoid lists of events. You are telling a story, but we don't need and then. Cut out the bits you don't need. If your character starts their story in the middle of a shopping centre, for example, we do not need to know how they got up that morning, what they had for breakfast, what time they went into the shower, who texted them in the morning, how they were driven to the town centre. Start it in the town centre, begin there. Cut out the bits you don't need that don't add to your story. Now, sometimes these exams have a write a story which ends with task. I highly recommend that you do not do that task, because if you do that task, it becomes much harder to structure to get your story in within those 45 minutes. If you do that task and you run out of time, you find life very difficult. If you do another task and you run out of time, you can probably find a way to get an ending in. And with dialogue, that's discussion between characters, keep it to a minimum of 2 pieces. So, a reminder, your story has to be plausible. Okay? It has to be something that's believable for the reader. Alright? That's how you score highly on the storytelling. You must take time to plan the story. 5 minutes going through that key structure that I mentioned earlier, writing down your notes. Sometimes when we plan, we're not sure where to start. You can start with a character, link them to your prompt, and then you begin to think of a story. You might start with an event. Okay, I want this to happen into my story. How am I going to get there? Who's going to be involved? But have a clear plot that you're going to go through. If you rush straight into the story, you will start writing and find that you're going around in circles and end up stopping. You must have a clear story. To be awarded a decent mark on this, your story must have a structure, a beginning, middle and end. Something must happen. There must be that main event in the story. And then use the wording of the question or the prompt in your first and final paragraph. And the biggest, I think, issue that we have with students at Durrington when they're doing the creative writing is their use of tense and punctuation, particularly slipping between past tense and present tense accidentally. Look carefully at the verbs that you're using. Are you staying in the right tense? If you know that you slip out of tense from time to time, give yourself time at the end of the exam to check. Punctuation is the other thing. The examiner will circle every punctuation mistake you make. If you miss out an apostrophe, you miss out a capital letter, you miss out a full stop, you use a comma, a splice comma when you should have used a full stop or a semicolon, for example, it will be circled and it will be classed as a basic error. Okay, so make sure you check and that those are accurate. Okay, so we've looked at those sample questions before. The last thing from me is to say good luck and enjoy the exam. It's going to be your first experience of being in an exam hall under the time pressure. Stick to those timings. Work hard, try hard. If it goes wrong or something goes wrong, it doesn't matter. This is just a practice exam. But your teacher needs to see you working at 100% so that they can give you the feedback that you need as you move into year 11 and you move towards your GCSEs. So good luck with it. Ask your teacher if you've got any questions, and we look forward to seeing you on the other side of the exam. Thank you.